Good morning, everybody. Chodesh Tov. This is my second favorite page of the Talmud. I know that we're not supposed to have favorites, but my favorite is Shabbat's Daf Lamed, which talks about the three converts who came to Hillel and Shammai, which we're also going to mention today. But the second one is Sanhedrin 65b, where it starts off with a question about Edim Zomimim, witnesses that were found out that maybe they're not lying, but they couldn't have testified about what they testified because their two other witnesses come and say, you were with us that day, so there's no way that you could have testified for what you witnessed. And so the question of the rabbis is using your mouth considered a maaseh or not? Is it considered doing something active? And their conclusion is that in two ways, edim zomim and moving um, a cow on an animal on Shabbat with your mouth, and also the muzzling a cow and then telling it to move. So that's all three of those are what's called kol, and the rabbis say that those are the exceptions to the rule, and so your voice does matter. And then they go a little bit on a tangent and give other examples of things that could be considered a maaseh, an act, even though it's only the mouth. And so they bring the story of Shaul and the woman that Baalat of that we talked about this morning in Benedict's class, and it says Tashma v'tomer Yishal Shaul Elohim Reiti Olim min Haaretz, which means maybe we can bring proof that the woman said to Shaul that I saw a godlike being coming up from the earth, and so she was only using her mouth. She wasn't doing any kind of actual act of witchcraft. And the rabbis push away this proof and say that no, because they have to use their own bones for the act of Ba'at Ha'ov. And then it goes to our subject, which is Shabbat, and tells us well, it brings other examples. And amazingly, there was an argument between Rabbi Akiva and Turnus Rufus, where he insulted Turnus Rufus's father and said that we know that today is Shabbat because the Sambatyon River, let me just bring that up. There's he says Turnus Rufus asked Rabbi Akiva, who is to say that today is Shabbat? Perhaps a different day of the week is Shabbat. And Rabbi Akiva said to him, the Sambatyon River can prove that today is Shabbat, as it is calm only on Shabbat. It's apparently a legend that is mentioned in the Zohar and other places that the Sambatyon River separates between the Jews from the 10 lost tribes and the rest of humanity. And so it's roaring and throwing stones and is impassable during the week, but on Shabbat it rests. Also a necromancer, because a necromancer can't bring up the dead on Shabbat. And the last thing is also related to Shabbat. The grave of his father, meaning Turnus Rufus, can also prove this, as it does not emit smoke on Shabbat, although smoke rises from it all week, as during the week as he is being punished in Gehinnom. He's not the only one that's mentioned in the Gemara that smoke comes out of his grave. There was a story about Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, who Rabbi Meir prayed that the smoke should stop from his grave. And last but not least, Mamash, our topic, Rabbi Chanina and Rav Oshaya would sit every Shabbat Eve, meaning Friday, and engage in the study of Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation. We don't know for sure who wrote it, but there's a tradition that Adam wrote it. And a third born calf, meaning third year or anyway, would be created for them, and they would eat it in honor of Shabbat. So they would eat every Friday. They would create a calf with Sefer Yetzirah and eat it on Shabbat. And so that is our topic today, about the preparations for Shabbat. And so let's go back to Shammai and Hillel. Rav Melamed says the following: the 6 weekdays and Shabbat are interconnected. Just as one has a body and a soul, so too the week has a body, the work days, and a soul, the Shabbat. Just as a wholesome person's body and soul work together harmoniously, the body receives spiritual inspiration from the soul and in turn serves as the vehicle for the soul's expression. So too, an ideal week is one in which Shabbat and the weekdays are closely linked. During the week, we prepare for Shabbat, thus elevating and sanctifying the weekdays. And also, if you remember, we mentioned that in Tefillah, we say Shir Shayom, we say Yom Rishon b'Shabbat, and the Sfaradim say Shabbat Kodesh, which draw their value from Shabbat. Sages recount that Shammai would always eat in honor of Shabbat. How would he do this? When he saw a fine animal, or maybe just a piece of meat, we don't know for sure, he would say, "This is for Shabbat." If he found an even better one, he would eat the first one and leave the better one for Shabbat. In other words, all week he would eat lower quality food, always saving the best for Shabbat. In this way, whenever he ate, he honored Shabbat and considered how he could honor it and sanctify it. And usually we don't paskin according to Shammai, but this is not a psak, it's just a way of behavior. And they bring as well the operation or the way that Hillel worked, which was Hillel possessed a different trait. All his actions were undertaken for the greater glory of God. He would make a point of honoring and sanctifying the weekdays as well as Shabbat, thus fulfilling the mandate to bless God every day. That's from Tehillim. Therefore, when good food came his way during the week, he would eat it, trusting that just as God made sure he had good food during the week, he would also provide the even better food for the Holy Shabbat, and thus Hillel honored and valued each day leading to Shabbat. According to halachic authorities, even Hillel agreed that for most people it is preferable to act like Shammai and designate the best food for Shabbat. However, Hillel's trust in God was exceptional, so he was certain that God would provide him with better food for Shabbat. One who does not possess this degree of faith must follow Shammai and honor Shabbat by designating the best food for Shabbat. And there's so many stories about that. I'll just give one very quick one. The Ben Ish Chai had a guest over for Shabbat, and at the end of the meal, they brought watermelon for dessert. And the wife brings the watermelon, and he taps it, and just like people choose the best watermelon, and he taps it and says to his wife, "No, there's a better one, I think, in the cabinet." And she went back and brought another watermelon, and he tapped it again, and he said again the same thing. There's a better one in the cabinet, and the third one he says, "Oh, this is great." Afterwards, he told his family that they only had one watermelon, but he was trying to honor his guest by saying how important it was and honoring Shabbat. So again, that's just a good example of how that was practiced. Nowadays, this law is almost irrelevant. There is such a vast selection of food in contemporary supermarkets at all times that there is no reason to think that if one eats a particular food during the week, he will not be able to find food as good for Shabbat. Therefore, today one must simply plan his shopping such that foods for Shabbat will be the best. While shopping for Shabbat, it is most proper to articulate that this shopping is to honor the Holy Shabbat, and even during the meal, there's a custom to say L'chvod Shabbat Kodesh, thus fulfilling the commandment of Zachor, and that's according to the Ramban on that verse in the Ten Commandments in chapter 20 of Exodus. It is also good to taste the food being prepared for Shabbat in order to season it correctly and enhance the pleasure of Shabbat. And that's from the Magen Avraham in the name of the Arizal, and because it does not contradict any halacha, that is the halacha, even though it's according to Kabbalah. And there's a verse, well, it's part of the prayer that we say for Musaf, To'ameh Chaim Zachu, that those who taste from it will merit life, and that's the verse that's used for this, and we will stop here.